Okay, it's story time here at the Lair. A little bit of my history. This is a video that I've wanted to make for some time now because it really plays into how the music that I like. And so what it is I'm calling this my years away from heavy metal. And okay, I have to give you a little background first. I was in high school from 84 to 88. I started, you've heard me tell this story, 1980, I hear Back in Black, and that's it. I fall in love with hard rock and heavy metal. And from 1980 to 1988, that's all I listened to. And back then, being that I didn't have a lot of money, this is way before the internet, I had a pretty limited collection of stuff. You know, I had my Sabbath, Priest, Maiden, Dio, Ozzy, AC/DC, Accept, you know, the hair metal stuff, Rat, Dawkins, Motley, all that other stuff mixed in. But it wasn't like I had, you know, hundreds and hundreds of cassettes. I had a pretty limited amount. I would tape things off the radio also. But what happened was right after I graduated from high school, and I remember in 1988, I remember starting to feel, like right after I got out of high school, I started to feel a little burnt out in getting tired of metal. And the thing you have to remember is that right around that time, 87, 88, 89, all my favorite bands were not putting out my favorite albums from them. Priest was doing Turbo and Ram It Down. Maiden was releasing, you know, Fear of the Dark and No Prayer for the Dying. AC/DC was doing, like, where was AC/DC at that point? I don't know, like Blow Up Your Video and Razor's Edge. I may be a little off with these years, but you get the idea of what I mean. Is that even Black Sabbath, you know, was going through a bit of a downswing. So it just felt like around 88, 89, I just felt tired of it. I was starting to get burnt out. I remember hearing, and I hate to even admit this because I love this album now, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, and feeling burnt out. I had been listening to Iron Maiden like every day for the last 8 years, 9 years. And I remember hearing Can I Play With Madness and just the galloping thing and everything and the production on those records at that time. It lost me. Priest, the way they were dressing, like in Turbo. I think of that picture on the inside cover of Turbo. And I was just like, I was just getting burnt out on it. And what also happened is I graduated high school in 88. And in 89, I became a music major in college. And I had to listen to a lot of music when I was there. There were assignments. You had to listen to these Beethoven symphonies. You had to listen to the jazz stuff. And so and this is the days before streaming, so I had to go up to the music library, sit down and listen to this music. So I was very busy with school. I was teaching lessons. I was playing in bands and stuff. So I was really busy, and a lot of my listening got taken up with the classical stuff and the jazz stuff. And it wasn't that I didn't like it. It was like sort of a new thing for me. And I remember becoming more interested in that kind of stuff. So I was listening to a lot of orchestral stuff and a lot of jazz stuff. I was still listening to rock and metal. Like, I was still following like Black Sabbath. I never stopped following Black Sabbath. But I remember like sort of losing interest in Maiden and Priest and just in general not really following it very closely anymore, getting burnt out on it. I remember Metallica's Black album. I kind of liked it, but, you know, and I was listening to rock stuff. Like at that time I was really into Primus, and I was starting to get into Frank Zappa. Some of the like early 90s stuff was happening now, like the first wave of grunge. I was really into, you know, like the Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and stuff. So I just kind of, a different phase in my life was just listening to different things and just drifted away from metal. I didn't discover death metal and the more extreme stuff till much later on. I mean, I heard that stuff, but I just couldn't get past the vocals. It just didn't connect with me at that time. And it was, then I graduated from college in '93. It took me a little extra time to get out of college. And now '93 was grunge starting. I just mentioned that, you know, that's the stuff that I was getting into. Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, all that stuff. I was really, really into that. And also at that time, I was living in Washington, D.C., or the Northern Virginia area, and I was playing in like a funk rock band. So I was really into like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, 24/7 Spies, Fishbone, things like that. And where I was in Northern Virginia, there were a lot of bands that were doing that kind of thing, like funk rock and ska rock and everything like that. And so I was listening to a lot of that stuff. I was going back to the 70s and listening to like Parliament, Funkadelic, and Sly and the Family Stone. And I guess it was around 90, gosh, I'm going to say, I should have looked up the year on this, but like 94, maybe, where I got Bruce Dickinson's Balls to Picasso. Saw it in a store, and I kind of felt like I had been away from metal long enough that it was like I was interested, you know, and it was like I felt this urge to start listening to metal again. And so I picked up Balls to Picasso, which had just come out, and I really, really liked it. And I also got Dio's Strange Highways, and then eventually Dio Angry Machines. And that was sort of getting my foot back into it. And right around that same time, I discovered Pentagram, because I was living in Northern Virginia, and Pentagram is from like the Virginia, Maryland area. I got their Be Forewarned CD, and then it just sort of started for me. And now we're talking like 94, 95. I started Rainbow, put out Stranger in Us All, somewhere around in there. I remember getting that. And then also I had just, I didn't really start getting a lot of CDs until like the early mid-90s, because a lot of the bands, they were just starting then to reissue their catalogs. Like I remember getting the Black Sabbath stuff on CD, and just starting to see this stuff then, and then starting to buy the back catalogs of the bands that I liked, that I only had this stuff on cassette or record. And in '96 then I moved, got married and moved to Pennsylvania, and it was like '95 that I discovered doom metal. And I just went headfirst into doom metal. And then I was completely back into heavy metal at that point. I was buying all the old albums that I had on cassette and record. I was getting them on CD. And then like about, what was it, like 99, Ozzy came back to Sabbath. Then Bruce comes back to Maiden. Then Halford comes back to Priest. And of course then, also right around that time, like 96, 97, I don't know, somewhere in there, I got Martin Popoff's Collector's Guide to Heavy Metal, and that got me searching, discovering new bands, more obscure metal bands. I started collecting vinyl, getting into vinyl around the late 90s, early 2000s. The internet, it was easier to discover things. I wasn't even on the internet until 96. I was really late to the internet. It was like 96, 97. So by the late 90s, early 2000s, you were starting to be able to research things, and there were some websites. I remember this Vibrations of Doom site. I'm not even sure it's still out there, but you used to be able to listen to all these obscure metal albums on there. Streaming, you couldn't download it, you know, and the sound quality was terrible, but you were still able to hear this. And then I was just fully back into it. And then probably like the early 2000s, mid 2000s, I started getting into death metal and black metal and the more extreme stuff. So, all right, there you go. There's my story about my 4 or 5 years away from heavy metal. I was still listening to rock stuff, you know, the first wave of grunge and all that kind of stuff, but sort of the classic metal stuff, the stuff that I always say, my original 6 bands, I've done videos on those, I sort of drifted away from them. So I thought it was important to share this, because when I make videos and I'm talking about certain things, ranking things, or my favorites, this or that, and people will say, how come you didn't mention this, or why does it, you know, this is, Well, because for some of those records, I wasn't there when they came out, and they didn't have the same impact on me. I was buying Point of Entry and Screaming for Vengeance and Defenders of the Faith the day they came out. I was buying Peace of Mind and, you know, Live After Death the day they came out. Whereas that stuff from like 89 to 92, 93, I didn't hear that stuff till later, till I went back and rediscovered that stuff that I had missed in that era. So that stuff doesn't quite have the same impact on me as, you know, the Blaze era of Maiden, the Ripper era of Priest. It didn't have the same impact on me as that 80 to 89 era did. So sometimes that's why when I make lists, and how come you didn't list this album or talk about this album? It's just because I'm not as familiar with those. I don't have as much of a history with those. And although I've gone back and rediscovered a lot of this stuff, let's face it, that stuff that you were listening to when you were young, 12 years old, 13 years old, first discovering it, those are the ones that tend to stick with you the longest and the most. So, all right, there you go. There's my story, my brief years away from heavy metal. Let me know if anybody out there, if you guys have had a similar experience like this. You know, 88 to 90, 91, 92, those weren't the greatest years for, you know, a lot of these classic traditional metal bands. So maybe some of you had the similar experience to me, or was there ever a time in your life where maybe your life took you in a different direction and you sort of drifted away from your favorite hard rock or heavy metal bands, but then you came back to them? So let me know in the comments down below if any of you have had a similar experience with your musical journey, okay? Let me know, and until we see you again, and make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.